everyone, welcome to our first episode on Della Roots. My name is Anita, and today we're going to be going over what our purpose is with this podcast, what we have in store for the future, and just a few intros about ourselves. So I just want to pass it on to my co-partner here, Mireya. Tell us a little bit about yourself.
Hi everyone, my name is Mireya Garcia. I am a student at Cal State LA working on my bachelor's. I'm 23 years old and my pronouns are she, her, hers. And I, the purpose of this podcast for me was to dedicate a platform or create a platform where obviously, I identify as Chicana and I assume Anita does too, where when I was put it to you this way, when I was searching on Spotify like a month ago, trying to listen to, or I was looking for Chicana like podcasts, and I didn't really come across like any at all, very, very few. And so that's what gave me the idea, like, oh man, like there's things that I want to listen to. Like I want there to be like a red table talk, but like, for La Chicanas. And so there's a lot that we'll be covering in the, next episodes, but mainly creating a like conversation, a plática, as our elders say, right? Where we talk about healing, we talk about decolonizing, we talk about our culture, obviously, we talk about womanhood and so much more, where we can create a virtual space for people to, to learn from and kind of create like that space for people where you have that like, oh, it's not just me, like, oh, I felt that too, and so something like that. And it's funny, I met Anita through Mecha right when I transferred from Cal State LA, or from Ventura College, my hometown, to Cal State LA. Immediately I was like, okay, where's the Mecha? Because I was really active in the one before, so I want to get like super involved. And COVID hit, so we weren't able to really meet in person or plan as much. It was very limited, but it also taught me how to redefine activism, and how, even though you're limited, it just you can use your platform in many ways in your life. It doesn't have to just be Instagram, social media. It can be in a lot of things. So, with the great help of that, and then of course life hits you, and so I had to leave Metro for a little bit, but then shortly after I stayed in touch with Anita and her best friend, and we created a women's circle. So that was one of the things I was really grateful for this year, was creating a lot of women's circles with different women of all ages, not just this one. And then we were talking about bucket lists and all these things we wanted to do, and Anita was like, yeah, podcast. And so here we are. This is our first one, so give us patience. What else? Let's see. Yeah, that's it for me. I shared what I shared. I'm gonna shut up and stop talking. Anita.
I want to just backtrack real quick. I like how you said that COVID in a way brought back like the redefining of activism, because I feel like a lot of people have one way of seeing activism, and that's going out to protest, that's being active within the community in that way. But people tend to sometimes ignore the background of things. How do we get to that protest? How is that protest created? Where does it sprout? And, where do we go from here? And a lot of people tend to ignore the organizing part and what comes after the protests and stuff like that. So I like how you mentioned the whole redefining what activism is, because before I used to see a lot of people mention how posting on social media doesn't do much, that's just performative activism.
Right.
And to me, I wouldn't deny that some people do partake in performative activism, but I think that social media, since it's such a huge space, a lot of people tend to be on it. And I think using social media to your advantage to talk about activism, history, what has happened to us historically as people, I think it's a great way, because you tap into that kind of new way of how people gain information. Mm-hmm. So I like how that stuck with me. Okay, so to talk about me, so I am Annabelle, but people call me Anita. I go to Cal City, and I am majoring in Chicanx and Latinx studies with a minor in pre-law, political science. I am from the small town called San Pedro. In San Pedro, the locals call it Pedro. Yes, very colonized.
No.
I'm sorry. Not Pedro, Pedro. Yeah, super colonized. I'm sorry. But as Mireya said, we met at Mecha. I am the president of Mecha. I came into place right after my best friend, actually. And so it's been quite interesting just getting into these spaces and starting to decolonize my mind and reflecting back on how I grew up, you know. Oh, and I forgot to mention my pronouns are she, they. Sorry. But yeah, it's just coming into Cal City was super different, a different vibe for me. Since I come from a predominantly mostly white neighborhood, and half of it is mostly it's white, half of it would be considered Latino, Latinx, or Hispanic. I don't like to partake on those terms because it partakes in like the erasure of indigenous and and being black as well. And so being part of Cal City, I was like trying to hide from myself and what my roots were. um Growing up, I feel like I wanted to be someone else other than who I am. And going into Cal City, I had these, ideas of who I wanted to be and what I wanted to do. But first and foremost, I had to decolonize myself in some way. And so I ended up, I've always been part of like activism work in some way in the talks and discussions of it. But it wasn't until I got to college where I started to really dive into that world. And I wanted to go to a march by myself, but someone suggested that I shouldn't do that, that was not safe. And so through that, I came into contact with Mecha, and they were going to go to the same march that I wanted to go to, and that's close the camps. And so that's how I got into Mecha and almost literally just activism work at as a student in the college level. And the purpose of like this podcast for me is bringing these discussions to people's homes and individuals who want to listen and want to learn and want to be part of these discussions. I think it's sometimes really hard with day-to-day life to find yourself a group or an organization where you can do this, because we're humans. We are stuck with this capitalistic world, and we have work, we have kids, we have all these things, and sometimes our time is so limited. And perhaps just a podcast is what will help us feel more connected to the community and these discussions in some way. And this is also part of what I am studying, so this is all I talk about. So it just makes sense that I just have a podcast, that we have a podcast and we talk about this and host these discussions. Because I will say this all the time: aside from doing protesting, from organizing and all that stuff, teach-ins are such a crucial thing to our society. Having teach-ins to talk about it in discussions, to talk about things that have happened to us historically and what continues to happen. And teach-ins opens that floor to really see the different perspectives of each individual and how they see the world and how it affects them, because the world does affect us in the same ways, but it also affects us differently in certain, maneras. And of course, we talk about intersectionality, and we can talk about intersectionality because I always like to bring that up. But yeah, that's why I'm here. And that's why we wanted to create this space for everyone. And
just run it by yourself. I mean,
no,
you put it so well. I love that.
Our dynamic, though, it's like really good to talk about these topics.
Yes,
it just blends,
I've totally forgot to talk about where I'm from. I was like, oh my god. But no, that's you put it well when you said connecting. Definitely. That's what I want to do. I mean, yeah, that's the whole purpose of this podcast, like you mentioned. And like how you said, some people just don't have time. I remember when I joined my chapter, at Ventura College, I loved that people were bringing their kids. Like even our professor, Rubisela Gamboa, she's like, you know, a mentor of mine, and she would bring her kids because she didn't, you know, have time or to drop them off at a babysitter, whatever the case was. And same with another young person who was there. You know, she was finishing her AA and she brought her kids, but I was like, this is also beautiful because these kids are like 7 and they're in Mecha listening to me and us talk about all these cool things that are going on campus. And so I was like, this is cool. I mean, this is how an elder, Jaime Vega, would say, you know, you're planting the semillas. So I thought that was very beautiful. And you know, it's our turn, you know, to pass the torch. And so now we're becoming the teachers, which is very nerve-wracking because, you know, we just finished finals and we're like, I don't know about you, but I got that self-imposter syndrome where you're like, what am I doing? Do I even belong here? I don't know if
Yeah.
I'm smart enough, right? And so Mecha has taught me a lot. I feel like we could have a whole episode on just what I've learned, but within Mecha. But what I'm trying to get to is how you said connecting, especially for those who don't have time, right? You want to be involved, and so all you do have time for is to scroll through Instagram and be like, oh, you know, this is going on, you know, around the world, or this is going on in my neighborhood or in my community, because you don't have the time because you're so buried in work and school, kids, like, oh, you know, so very busy. Where, just to like throw in where I'm from, because as you mentioned, so you know how far we are from each other. We're actually
Yeah.
doing this through Zoom right now. I'm from Ventura. It's also very white, very white, and I didn't know it was because my high school was like 80% Latino or Latinx, and it's still felt very white and I was very whitewashed. But we'll get into that in another episode. But just real quick, I'm from like the south end, so it blends almost into Oxnard, right, like right before that. And it's the 805 area, very my community itself was very brown, but as soon as I stepped out to it, it was very like suburban mix with it's not a city, you know, it's very suburban slash just like small town, but not country, so suburban-ish. And it was I actually just moved out of that neighborhood a year, like earlier this, earlier this year, like in March. And now I'm in a nicer neighborhood, but unfortunately it's really white. So yeah, and it's called Montalvo, and I grew up there. I was born and raised there, and it was very beautiful. You know, I like the ice cream man, the paletero, and the elotero. They don't come anymore in my neighborhood, you know. But so it's, you know, there's blessing, pros and cons, I guess you could say. But it
Mhm.
was very rough. So I'm kind of glad my family doesn't have to see what goes on there anymore because it was really bad. And so yeah, that's where I'm from. What really got me into Mecha was elections. I was very naive and ignorant on what was going on politically. And I remember in high school, or just, you know, a lot of people would say, oh, you know, I just don't do politics. And then as I got older, it was specifically white women that would say, I just don't do politics. And it's like, that's because it doesn't affect you. It affects
Mhm.
me. And so, and then I took my first class. I was like 19, and it was my second year at Ventura College, and I was dropping and adding classes, random ones. I didn't know what my major was. I thought it was going to be like zoology because I love animals. And then to find out, you know, I took Chicano studies, my first two professors that just changed my whole perspective and really helped me grow, because I want to give them credit, even if they probably won't listen to this podcast, is Drew Bisela and Nathan Lopez. So they really helped me change. And obviously it was Chicano studies. Um, and I really grew from there. And then I joined Mecha, and then I became president. And then leadership just came natural to me. But I also didn't want to take over the room, you know, and just talk for everyone because it's exhausting. So delegation for me was really, really difficult. But nonetheless, I loved it. I loved it so much. It's like there were times where I would ditch class, like environmental science, because I'm working on, you know, t-shirts or poster banners or whatever the case was. So it didn't really feel like work. And so hopefully one day that, you know, I'll work into that and get paid for it, you know, like not profiting off of people, but what I mean is like, you know, helping my community, but also having a source of income, you know. So
Yes.
that would be the best of both worlds, really. But yeah, so even though I'm not as active as Anita, because Anita is on there, she's doing a
Stop.
lot. She's doing